Hey there, and welcome to the Sudo Show, brought to you by the Destination Linux Network. On this episode, we'll be talking to Rick Hall, lifetime entrepreneur and CEO of Aginity. We discuss data analytics and starting your own business, all that and much more, coming up on the Sudo Show. Welcome to the Sudo Show, your home for all things enterprise open source. I'm Michael, the IT guy, and on this,
who the heck? What are you doing here?
Eric, is that you?
Yeah.
Is that you? I just thought it'd be nice to have so a new voice to be in the show. So I decided I'd just kind of take over for a little bit, and I didn't see you there, so I guess it's your show. You could have it back right now if you want to. It's fine.
Oh, thanks. You're in my spot, dude.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is your chair?
It is my chair. Go find a stool or something.
Okay. Oh, I've got plenty of those. All right, cool. All right, I'll be right back. I'll get one right now. Okay, I got it. Let's go.
Hey, everybody. I'm Eric, the IT guy, and joining me this episode is Michael Tunnell from the Destination Linux Network. Brandon is actually away this week on some business, so I asked Michael to join us. He's experienced as an entrepreneur and as someone who deals a lot with data and analytics. I thought he would be an excellent addition to our show for today. So welcome to the Sudo Show, Michael.
I'm glad to be here. I've always wanted to be on this show and especially take over for a little bit. So it's really fun. And I'm glad to be here, especially because, as you said, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm really interested in these kinds of topics. So it was very exciting for me to be a part of this episode. For those who don't know, I'm one of the co-founders of the Destination Linux Network and a content creator here on DLN. I'm the host of the This Week in Linux podcast and one of the hosts of Destination Linux and Hardware Addicts on DLN, and also an open source enthusiast, though I'd like to prefer to refer to it as open sorcerer. So if you want to take that, feel free to do so.
I love it. And in fact, Michael has done a ton of work behind the scenes for this show, and he doesn't get nearly enough credit for it. The logos, the branding, everything. I think I might have mentioned on a hangout recently that you get what we're trying to build here on the show. Over a year ago, when we started talking about launching the show, you immediately said, we need you to partner with DLN because this is a perfect partnership, and it's been awesome to be a part of DLN. And I'm actually surprised we haven't had you and Ryan on the show.
Right?
We should probably have you guys on the show and talk about what DLN is.
That would be a good thing. I think it'd be fun to do, especially with having the combination of all four of us in that conversation. It'd be fun. And I also was really interested in it because, like you said, we've talked about it before you started the show, and you came to me asking me for advice, because I've been doing podcasting for a while and all that sort of stuff. And you were just kind of saying, hey, what kind of advice would you have can you take a minute to let me know? And I was like, hey, that's an interesting idea for a podcast. You should do it for my network. Because it's something that I've wanted. I'm really interested in the enterprise stuff. And I was, really, really willing to have that kind of thing on the network. So when you said that you were doing this, the idea, like the light bulbs popped in my head. It's like, we have to have him. And it's great that you and Brandon joined the network because it has been so enlightening for, all these episodes you've done. And I hope for this episode that I can help make it even more enlightening for those who were listening.
Yeah, well, we'll see. You did sit in my chair, so,
I was just keeping it warm for you. What's wrong with that?
Although I will say this has been an awesome set of relationships with DLN, with all the creators. I mean, we've been on the same page pretty much the entire time. Prime example of that would be when we were talking about branding and wanting a logo. I gave Michael the most vague idea of what I had in my head. I wanted something that showed the terminal, but I wanted something simple, something very modern looking. I told him I wasn't particular on colors or style or anything. And within a couple of days, I think you came back with the logo, and I don't think we've made any changes to it since. And the moment that I saw it, I was like, yeah, that's yes, that's exactly what I asked for.
Yeah, I remember our conversation about it. You said, I have an idea, this sort of thing. And I was like, I got this. And I'm glad that I did have it because because I remember having an idea and you're like, I don't really know exactly how I want it to be. Like, oh, I've already got an idea with this conversation. We're good. We're good. And for the fact that it was it, it worked out for what you wanted is it was very exciting for me because when I've done logo design for a long time. For those who don't know, I'm also a designer, and I've done marketing and that sort of stuff in like a business world, and I have created logos for all sorts of different companies and projects and whatnot. And it's rare that I nail it on the first try, but it's wonderful when I do. So when you were super excited about it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is perfect then. Because this is exactly what I was hoping it would be like the vibe for. And now then we started doing like how do we do the animations and the branding and whatnot about the video version and the waveforms, all that sort of stuff. It's been just great to be able to, collaborate with this show as part of DLN and just a part of the community in general, because the Sudo Hangouts are fun to be a part of and that sort of stuff.
But yeah, I mean, you nailed the branding right off the bat, and that branding has extended from Sudo Show to Sudo Labs to Sudo Hangouts. You're one of our most frequent attenders on Hangouts, and just it's great to have you on the show today.
Oh yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So without further ado, let's dive in. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean recently announced their new Managed MongoDB service, which is a fully managed database as a service. With Managed MongoDB, you can focus more on building scalable, high-performance apps and less on maintaining the database. DigitalOcean built this service in partnership with MongoDB Inc., and together they've ensured that you will get access to all the latest releases of the Mongo database as they become available. As a listener of the Sudo Show podcast and a member of the DLN community, you can get started for free. Actually, better than free, because DigitalOcean is giving you a $100 credit when you go to do.co/DLN-Mongo. Need more than just a database? You can use your $100 credit to try out all the amazing services DigitalOcean has to offer. Again, go to do.co/DLN-Mongo to get started with your $100 free credit on DigitalOcean's new Managed MongoDB. And thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Sudo Show and the entire Destination Linux network. Rick Hall is the owner of Aginity and is a repeat offender in the entrepreneurial world, and has a lot of experience in the software development world. So really glad to have you on with us today, Rick.
Yeah, Eric, thank you for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in technology?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's kind of a roundabout way, right? So when I got out of college, I was really interested in the public world and got involved in associations and ultimately in kind of the management and membership for a nonprofit. And what I found myself involved in was this kind of problem of how do you maintain members and grow members? And that turns out to be a data and analytics problem, right? And so I went from, kind of thinking mostly about the nonprofit world to thinking about, kind of data and membership. And that kind of got me into the software world. And I landed in that space in the early days of data warehousing and, kind of what is now kind of big data. And I've kind of been there ever since. So I worked in consulting. I've done a couple of different startups. I've been able to see 2 out of 3 end up with successful exits and sales. And now I'm here doing it a 4th time with Aginity.
You just can't get enough.
I can't get enough. Glutton for punishment, clearly.
Yeah, it's a very clear sign when someone is really an entrepreneur, not just someone like trying to be one, but that it's in their blood when they have so many different ones. And once they sell one of their companies, they just can't stop. Got to keep making more, or jump into other ones. So you talked about Aginity. Tell us a little bit about Aginity. What services you offer, and just a little bit about the history of it as well.
Sure. So Aginity is a software company, and we're focused on the analytics market. And really, what we do is we provide tools that help a kind of a non-technical business person use big data and use it in their business and access big data platforms, right? So, increasingly, companies have large amounts of data. Maybe in the past, you could have manipulated all the data you cared about in Excel, where today, you might be in a business where there are kind of terabytes of data sitting in all these corporate systems. And instead of having to call a bunch of engineers to get them to program what you need, we provide tools that let business people do it themselves.
Basically, you got involved in associations and different groups of people, and you found a business problem. You worked your way all the way from just being a member of these different associations to starting not 1, not 2, but 4 different businesses to solve this particular problem. With that in mind, is that kind of the big need in technology right now?
Yeah, you kind of, when you put it that way, you think, what is this idiot, right? It takes him 4 times to get it right. Yeah, I love that. Don't share that with my wife, by the way. It's so, kind of, I mean, obviously technology keeps changing, right? And when I started, kind of my interest in data was about the problem of how do you maintain members. And I kind of played around with computers all the way back to high school. So I was kind of, knew something. But the basic problem of loading membership systems and being able to figure out how do you renew your members turns out to be an analytic problem, right? And it was that interest in that analytic problem that got me involved in analytics. So I've always kind of sat at its intersection of the business problem and the technology that intersects with that problem. And so, it turns out there's a lot of those intersections, right? And they keep kind of changing. And so when I decided to make the move from the nonprofit space to just pursue that idea, I joined an early stage consulting firm, and there were 5 people at the firm. And, they were a small enough firm to be willing to take a risk on somebody who had no computer science degree. This is back in the time of early telco after the breakup of AT&T. So now I'm aging myself, and we had kind of a successful run. We built that firm to well over 100 consultants. I became a partner, and it was kind of a cool way to get into the space because as a consultant, you got to see a lot of different business problems, right? And so we worked in consumer goods, and we worked in retail, and we worked in financial services, and we worked in telco. And, there's just a whole variety of different interesting problems there. And while I was doing that work, it was kind of right at the time when Microsoft decided to dip their toes into analytics and what has become a big part of their business. And they were looking for kind of consultants who were in the space to sit on an advisory panel to look at the problem. And we had been working on a really interesting problem around risk in financial services. I got invited and I got involved. And then I had this stupid idea that consulting, we could actually productize what we were doing. And that became the basis of founding the first startup where I was just the CEO with a couple of partners. And that was G4 Analytics. And we founded this company on September 10th, 2001. So we had this big dinner in Seattle. We were working with Microsoft at the time. All the funders were there, committed to everything we're doing. I went back to my hotel. I got up the next morning, went for a run, walked into the hotel, and watched the planes crash into the World Trade Center. And you would think that I might have been smart enough to go back and get my corporate job back. But that was early on. And what it meant for us, though, is we went from we're going to build this platform for all kinds of analytic apps to kind of narrowing in on one problem, which is consumer goods and pricing and retail. And that becomes the basis of G4 Analytics. And those 2000s were kind of a tricky time for software startups because companies were very risk averse, going from raising a lot of money. And by the way, all our funders, they didn't walk away the next day. They said, we'll stick with you, but then they really kind of walked away over the next few months, right? So our funding kind of dried up, and we kind of pulled a little bit of a hat out of our bag using consulting to fund this company. And so it took us a long time to get to what we really thought was a really good product, which is around pricing and retail. Nielsen bought that company in 2012. So that was kind of the exit. I stayed there and ended up running a big part of that business for 5 years. And then, I thought this is great. And I took a CTO job for a retail services company called Acosta, a $2 billion firm. And I watched the CEO change 3 times in a year. And that was enough to tell me, okay, it's time to go back to, my roots. And so, I left and I founded Karen Corporation. And the previous CEO of Nielsen, who was a friend of mine, who I kind of worked for after selling the company, he introduced me to the people who had founded Aginity and said, hey, these guys kind of need your help. I helped for a while, and then we bought the company. And here I am. We closed the deal on March 10th, last year. So back into the, everything right in the middle of crazy times, right? So
it seems like that's a pattern for you.
So let's hope I don't ever start another company, right? Because the world will fall apart, right? So, we literally had this planned meeting for all the executives. They're all going to meet for a week of planning, and then boom, lockdown happened. So here's the crazy thing. Here we sit 15 months later. I have a team that's grown from 8 to 35 or so now. The team has never been in the same room together.
Oh, wow.
The entire growth of the company is all being done in this kind of virtual world. And you know what? It's actually worked great for us.
Yeah. I mean, it's changed a lot of people's method of doing business, and it's actually in a lot of ways enhanced it for some who realized that they could do that. And it's very interesting that you're, starting a company at that period, because it is such a chaotic thing to kind of change your situation and adjust to all of the stuff that's happening. And I'm interested, like the state of analytics these days has become just enormous. Like there's so much. Big data is a understatement. It is terabytes of content. Like the amount of data that is in these types of analytical things. Like, how do you manage that stuff? And what is like the current state of analytics in your opinion?
Yeah. So first of all, you're right. Data has exploded and it's continuing to explode, right? And what's cool about that explosion is we've also found out, turns out almost everybody can use data, right? So, kind of everybody's got a use for data in their process. So the first thing about that is there's massive amounts of data. So you got to have platforms that support it. So we can talk about that in a second. The second thing is that because everybody needs it, there's no way a central team is ever going to keep up with the demands of everybody at the edge of a business, right? So the old model, which was a big centralized team putting all the data in a very centralized system, just doesn't work. So that's led to really two critical trends, which are part of where analytics is today. The first is the development of these new hyperscalable, highly elastic, cloud-based analytic platforms. So Snowflake and Redshift and BigQuery. And what's super cool about these platforms is, first of all, that the engineering work that's gone into handling the scale of data that these platforms can now handle is enormous. And it really is the state of the art, right? And there's 4 or 5 companies that have these capabilities. The second thing is, because these platforms are now cloud resident, they're very scalable and elastic. And that's really critical, because when I was working on big data warehouses, we had to buy the server capacity in advance. So we had to know the workloads that we were going to support, right? So like, I'm going to do, some kind of financial analysis thing, and I got this many data records being produced every day, and I'm going to process it in a certain way, and I'm going to produce an output, right? Now, if you're my customer, Michael, and I do what you asked me to do at the beginning, great. But, Eric works in the next department over, and Eric says, I really like what you've done there, but I need to do this other thing with that data. And I come back to you and say, well, that's great, Eric, but you didn't come to me when I bought the server capacity, so I have the capacity for you. And if I want to incorporate your needs in the system, first of all, you got to give me another couple $1 million to buy the hardware. And second of all, you got to wait for me to, migrate and upgrade. And Eric is like, well, screw it. I'm going to go figure out how to do this on my desktop in Excel and whatever kind of, tool that I can. Thus is the history of analytics.
Challenge accepted.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So because these platforms are hyperscalable, and because there's no way any central team can anticipate the needs of Eric, right? Because Eric's needs are changing.
Not a chance.
Many have tried and many have failed.
Yeah. Eric's needs are changing all the time. He's buying companies, he's selling companies, he's starting new products. Who knows what he's doing, right? But it's always something different. It's happening all over the business. And, the only way analytics can support that kind of a capability is with elastic, hyperscalable computing. And that's what these new platforms provide us today. So that's really cool. The other thing is that I, who may be the central data warehouse team, I can't keep up with the Erics of this world. There's too many of them. I sat down with the chief technology officer, chief analytics officer of a big healthcare company about 2 months ago. And, he said to me, look, I got 800 people on my analytics team. And people think, it's a really big team, right? And it's a pretty big team. He says, you know what? But there are 17,000 people in our business doing analytics, right? And there's no way my team of 800 is ever going to keep up with what they're doing, right? So I need tools that empower those 17,000. But I just don't want to send them off loose to do whatever the heck. I want my 800 people to be leveraged by the 17,000 in some kind of way that they can collaborate. And that's, I think, where the state of analytics is today, is empowering the many Erics of the world, the 17,000 or whatever the number is, because they're in every business. And doing that in such a way that we can still take advantage of the engineering capabilities of the central team, but using these really cool new data platforms that give us all this flexibility that we never had in the past.
We talked about the current state of analytics, but the future of analytics is, it's ever growing. Like the concept of data of analytics in the past, like 20 years or so, it was, you collect some data, you would be able to have a small subset of data that you could reference. But now we have, like, for example, you talked about Nielsen. Like the Nielsen's whole business model was about having certain types of data and related to, different types of industries. And we have this massive change over the past 15 years that analytics has become enormous monster in some people's opinions. And I'm curious, do you think that it's going to get even bigger, or is there going to be some like kind of pivots where the industry might go into like a split point where they would have different types of analytics rather than just being a giant continuous growing type of situation?
Yeah. So, I think there's a number of things there. So first of all, if I knew exactly what's going to happen in the future, like I'd just sit around and bet on the stock market, by the way.
Right. Exactly. Or some crypto.
Yeah. I don't have that, that insight, but I'll tell you what I do see is that, it's changing all the time. Everybody has an opportunity to use data. And sometimes they want to use data in this kind of, machine learning way where they're using it to, kind of help predict or anticipate, what's happening based on some historical data set. So I think those kind of, let's call them intelligent analytics, are going to continue to grow. I'm not in the world that views that Darth Vader is going to use those analytics to take over the world, and it's going to be a Terminator moment. I see that more from an empowerment perspective, right? So as smart as Eric is sitting in the business, he can't possibly look at every record, a sale, to find a pattern, right?
Well, it just depends on his attitude.
Yeah, if he's willing to do it, he could do it, right? But a machine can, right? So,
yeah.
What machine intelligence can do is like it loves lots of data, right? And it can look at every individual record and start to see patterns. And that becomes the basis of, kind of intelligent advice that empowers better decisions by the Erics. I think that's where I see AI the most. Sometimes it's actually making the decision, but I think more often than not, it becomes a tool in a process that a human is still involved in. And there's reporting and there's operational analytics. It's just, data is everywhere. Data is going to continue to explode. And I think its use will be throughout the world. But I see analytics as the use of data to drive business outcomes. That's how I define analytics. So, put that way, it kind of is everywhere, right? And when we think of it, we don't think of analytics as AI or BI, which is reporting, or operational. We think it's all, hey, you got to use data. We want to make it easy for you to use data. You're going to use it in a number of different ways, sometimes all of those ways at the same time. And I think that's going to, continue to happen, because I think that it's pretty clear that most business processes can be done better by the use of, history and data.
I have a little bit of a maybe controversial question for you. And it's really interesting that we're talking about this, but there's a lot of people who are uncomfortable with the state of analytics in terms of some companies are heavily collecting data without permission. Sometimes they're collecting data that's unnecessary and things like that. How do you feel about the industry's like present form of some companies out in the world doing excessive data collection, like pinging cell towers and whatnot without permission and stuff like that? Do you think that the society's reaction to that is reasonable, or is it like an overreaction? What do you think about that?
No, I think society's reaction is completely reasonable. I think that people should have knowledge of how whatever data they have is being used, and they should be in a position where they can permission it or not. And if a provider uses that data in a way that benefits the user, consumer, great. They're going to allow them to do it. But if the collector is collecting the data unbeknownst to the user and then using it in some way that doesn't benefit them, that should be called out, right? So, and I think for the industry to prosper, we have to be open about it, right? Because, people will see us as manipulating them. And, that's not going to work to our advantage. If we are doing things that benefit people with the data, then they have every right to take their data back and they should know about it. So that's my take.
Great. I totally agree with that.
Today's interview is sponsored by none other than Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams, and businesses to store, share, and sync sensitive data. You can go to bitwarden.com/DLN to check out their amazing service. With security breaches a regular occurrence now, experts suggest using a unique password for every account. That could easily be over 200 passwords. How do you remember all of those? That's where a password manager comes in, and the password manager trusted by the Destination Linux network is Bitwarden. You can get started on Bitwarden for free or unlock a suite of additional tools for just $10 per year. That's right, per year. That $10 will give you all the free features, 1 gigabyte of encrypted file storage, Vault health reports, 2-factor code generation, and priority customer support. If you want to make the smart move, get a password manager and make that manager Bitwarden. Go to bitwarden.com/DLN, and thank you, Bitwarden, for sponsoring the Sudo show and the entire Destination Linux network.
I would just want to quickly pivot to a different topic because we talked about how you've started multiple companies and that sort of thing. And I think that as a person who's also been involved in creating multiple companies, I'm very curious about your experience with getting started. And you've had some interesting patterns of when you've created certain companies, like we talked about previously. But I'm curious, in terms of a general sense of creating a business as well as creating a technology related business, what do you think are the pros and cons, the good, the bad, the ugly, and that sort of stuff? How do you feel about people wanting to get into the space of entrepreneurship?
So first of all, it's been a great journey for me, right? And if you're possessed by ideas or by a problem that you really want to solve, then it's a great path, right? If you're doing it just to make a buck, it's a pretty perilous path, right? And if you stick with it long enough, you'll succeed, but not always, right? So at least 2 times I can think of, I've gone months without taking a salary, right? And if you don't have stomach for that level of risk, that's not a good thing. And then frankly, I had a company where I had done that, and we were on a path that I thought was be successful, and I had to sign for my house. Okay, that is the kind of thing that you kind of have to be prepared to do, right? Because if you got a business and you believe in it, when times are tough, that's not the time other people are going to invest in your business if you're not investing in it yourself. So we teach everybody about financial management. We say, spread your risk, right? Well, an entrepreneur has to be prepared to double down on the one thing that they are doing, right? And you got to be prepared to put all in on 18 red, right? And, 18 red is yourself, right? And if you're, not everybody's prepared for that. And if you're not prepared, that's fine. In which case I would say, don't be an entrepreneur, right? Because, there are the Googles of the world that, as far as we can tell, when Sergey and Bryn, got out of the dorm room, it's been just straight up from there, right? Good for them. That's so statistically insignificant as a percentage of companies that it's not even worth talking about, right? Most of us have those moments where you have to double down. So that's a big part of it.
It's a very interesting thing you said about, your reaction to it is to make sure that, when people, a lot of times you'll see people doing motivational speakers when they're talking about becoming an entrepreneur, they put the starry-eyed approach to it and don't be like realist about it. So I appreciate your responses to that, because I just a few days ago had a conversation with someone who was trying to be an entrepreneur but wasn't really in it for the thing they were doing. They weren't passionate about the company they wanted to do. All they wanted was it for the money. It's like, well, that's something you should go into, like, corporate America or something like that, where you're working for the paycheck, and that's fine if that's your thing. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's going to end very badly because you don't have the passion. And that's very interesting that you said that, because it completely falls along with my experience, because I've worked on multiple companies, and sometimes I wasn't passionate about it, and I had to depart from said companies because I needed to focus on the thing that I do want to do, which is why I founded this network. And I think there's a lot of great points that you made. But I'm curious, what do you think is, we talked about like the passion of being a way to give a foundation for the concept of being an entrepreneur. What do you think are the skills necessary for doing it? Do you think having a business acumen or technical acumen, what do you think is like the basis for what makes a good entrepreneur?
I think a lot of the culture about entrepreneurship is about the brilliant idea person, right? So we think like Steve Jobs, he had the great idea and that was the foundation of his business. I actually think that where business is today is that we should think about not the idea, which is a solution to a problem, but focus on the problem. I think the key to successful business is identifying a group of people or companies you want to serve. Let's call that the market. And it's about identifying some value you want to create for them. That's the opportunity. And if you know the market and the value, and that's your focus, your business, then that's the basis of great business. Because actually how you deliver that value, turns out, best way to deliver that value is to experiment, test and learn. I'm going to try this. It didn't work. I'm going to try that. And it didn't work. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to iterate on it. And I'm going to get it right eventually, right? So rarely is the big idea, the foundation of a business. The big value, the North Star, I'm going to create this value. That's the way I think that, kind of is critical. So I think that, there's a lot of really good writing about kind of entrepreneurship. You said passion. I totally agree with you. I think, and I also think it's, look, if you don't have a clear view on a market, let's call them people or companies that you want to serve, and value that you want to create, right? Don't bother, right? Or at least don't bother talking to me about it, right? Because that to me is what it's about, right? Is about creating value. And then, and once you know what value you're kind of creating, if you're willing to stick with it long enough, almost everything can be approved, right? We can always deliver more value if we're focused on the value. You might not get it right initially, but if you stick with it, you kind of will. So maybe stubbornness, stick-to-itiveness, focus on the value, passion. Those are, I think, critical skills. Business humor, you better know a little bit about money and accounting. But I would say the next thing after all that is people skills, right? Because whatever you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't know. And you better be able to find people who know it and motivate them to come work for you. Those gaps, right? Because if you can't do that, you're kind of hosed.
That's a good point.
So we have a business problem that we've identified. We have an idea of how to fix that problem. We're passionate about it. We've started our business. We're on the right track. One of the problems with startup life, with being an entrepreneur, especially if you're kind of starting on your own or with a very small team, is that is your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You wake up and you go to bed thinking about it. You toss and turn at night because you got to make this sale or you got to get this funding approved. I mean, it really can consume your entire life. You definitely have to have a certain set of mental health skills to kind of compartmentalize.
Sure.
So, I mean, especially with the pandemic last year and with work-life balance being so out of whack, how have you found ways to unplug, to set work aside and enjoy a hobby or family? How do you unplug?
Yeah. So interesting question, right? So I live in Steamboat, Colorado, up in the mountains, and
it's a beautiful area.
I had a place here for 5 years, and I've lived here permanently since just before the pandemic struck. Pretty darn lucky. And for me, kind of, I walk, I ski, I hike, I, do all these things. And partly I do them because I can't sit still if I'm not doing them. And it turns out I do all my best thinking when I'm out moving like that, right? So I've found a way to have that incorporated into, my world, my ability to have balance. Because you're right, it is a great challenge. And, if you go talk to a bunch of VCs, particularly, kind of the Silicon Valley VCs, their model is to fund teams of, young people who have no life, right? And that they can just go do this thing, 100% of the time. It's not compartmentalized because there's only one compartment, right? It's called the business, and they all live in the same house, and they, it's that really is how they do it. I don't know. I mean, I guess it works for them, right? The model, and I've been lucky because I kind of did that at the beginning, but not quite like that. I was successful enough to have, kind of found enough people around me who are kind of, supportive of what I'm doing. And so like now with Aginity and the founding of Karen, I had a board of directors ready made. I had a set of advisors. I had people willing to go without work to start this company up just because we all sat down together and we kind of said, okay, we want to work on a problem we all understand. We want to work with people we like. That turned out to be all the people in the room. We already knew how we worked together. So if you're lucky and maybe you do something right, you develop a trusted network, right, that will help you in this process because it is a team sport. You need people on your team. You have to find balance. If you're young enough and really willing to do the classic Silicon Valley VC thing, and you're going to live in a house in Palo Alto with 6 other people, more power to you, right? At my stage of the game, that's not what I'm doing, right? So
Sure.
It's partly due to previous success, I guess.
Yeah, when I first got into being an entrepreneur, it was basically an 80-hour work week kind of thing. Double up the typical and just grind as much as possible. And then I realized that was only going to work for so long, and I started to get burnt out pretty quickly. Well, it took a couple of years, but it still happened. At that point, I decided to pivot a lot and try to balance it. I'm still working on the balance, but at least I know I need to do it. There's that.
Yeah, if you get that figured out, let me know because I'm not sure. I think that's a lifelong journey, right? Is to find balance.
Yeah, exactly. I even started doing like meditation and stuff, which is nice because there's a lot of people who are in the entrepreneur world say that meditation is good for you and that sort of stuff. So it's really hard to turn off the brain, but I'm working on it.
That's my hike in the mountains, right? That's how
yes, exactly.
Turn things down.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. I was thinking about getting like a bicycle or whatever and just riding around the trails and whatnot, trying to do it for the same kind of thing. I'm curious. Like we've talked about how you structured your company based on like the people you're doing the work with and that sort of stuff. How important do you think it is to have the team behind you? We already talked about how you find people who fit the thing that you don't know. How important is it to you to find people who you enjoy spending time with? Because I would assume that is one of the most important things. Doing the job is one thing, but if they do the job and they unfortunately maybe they annoy you and sort of stuff, is it worth having the high quality work versus making sure that the person is, you have a cohesive fit sort of thing?
I'm not sure that I've ever seen a high performance team where people didn't get along. They don't necessarily have to be best buddies. In fact, but all the high performance teams I've been involved in, they actually have. People actually really like spending time with each other. That's not to say there's not conflict, right? So I always say that innovation is conflict, right? It's conflict between an old idea and a new idea. And we're just going to build a constructive approach to conflict into our business. And if there's somebody you don't like for whatever reason, then you've got to address that. If you do address it, you'll get better. But I think most people are willing to like just about anybody. This is going to sound a little crazy if they perform up to the expectations, right? So one of the key things about a high performance team is, first of all, they have to have a clear goal. They have to know what what position they play. They have to trust the other people in the other positions, and they have to have accountability to everybody on the team. So as soon as somebody on the team isn't accountable, they're not pulling their weight, well, that becomes a problem, right? So a really good team kind of polices itself. And, as a leader, you have to be willing to let them do that, because, you'll find that you'll lose your highest performing people if you don't address the underperforming parts of a team. But I think that if you have a clear vision, if everybody knows their role on the team, which is, I guess, that's really important in a leader, is have a clear vision, North Star, have everybody understand their roles, and then have clear accountability. So you have accountability and responsibility that go together. Then I actually think, and you have a mechanism for dealing with conflict. Then I think that is the recipe for a really good team. And I think that people of very different walks of life can participate in a team like that, because you're going to work through whatever your conflict is, and you're going to develop trust because there is accountability to results. I was we're in the middle of raising a round right now, and several of the investors that I've talked to, they asked me the question, well, what's your exit strategy? And I'm like, well, if we're really successful, we go public. I don't know that that's highly likely, but, the really great companies in our space, that's what they do. The next step down might be that there's lots of adjacent companies that would someday acquire us. And there's a couple other routes within that. I said, but look, nobody here is out to flip it, right? We like what we're doing, and we kind of like each other, right? And we like doing this work together. I don't think that comes from accident. I think that comes from that kind of the right structure for success.
You mentioned starting a company just to flip it. That seems to be a growing trend in technology. Come up with some cool idea, get some publicity, and get the big paycheck and walk out the door. Do you think that's kind of tainted the startup culture, or somehow maybe degraded?
I think it works very infrequently, right? So, yeah, people are going to try all kinds of crazy things. It's back to Mike, your earlier point that what about this trust for data? People do things that don't make sense. And maybe this is where I'm an idealist, but I think that those patterns get flushed out because they're not successful patterns in the long run. In the short run, you're going to have some examples of that are going to look super successful, and people are going to think, well, that's the way to do it. But I think in the long run, it rarely works that way. And I think that most successful businesses are focused on creating some value. And I'll tell you what I really like is, kind of, I don't know whether it's the neighborhood plumbing company or heating and cooling company. I love these little small businesses that, where some guy and his wife started this business, and they just super care about this little group of customers they're servicing. And every time I see some little business like that, and here in Steamboat, there's a bunch of those, you think that's what makes a market economy so effective, right? It's just a great life. If you can actually deliver value to people, I mean, what else can you really ask for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's starting an open source project or starting a technology startup like what you've done, there's a lot of shared skill sets. There's a lot of similarities in processes and time, and the time that's required to do so. So whether it's starting a company or starting a project of the scale of what an open source project can scale to, what kind of lessons would you have for people who have the right problem that they've identified, who have the passion to fix it, who have an idea on how to fix it, maybe a team of a few people around them? They've got all the necessary pieces. So from your experience, what lessons have you learned that you'd like to share with someone who's getting ready to make that leap?
That's a good question, right? Because I think you start with what's that back to the value you're creating, right? And I think that one of the biggest things we've learned in software and product development is there isn't necessarily one answer, and you need to find a mechanism to test and learn and iterate till you get to a point where the market tells you you have a product that's going to work, right? Product market fit in the terminology of the industry, right? So I like to say the speed of iteration is the speed of learning, and there is no such thing as a requirement, only a hypothesis. So if you start with, I only have a hypothesis, and the faster I can iterate, the faster I can learn, and the faster I can learn, the sooner I can get to signals that I've got a solution. Well, that's a pattern that whether you're open source or commercial, I think works, right? And I think and by the way, the entirety of product thinking and software development wasn't there until the past 15 years. So if you look at, kind of the lean startup and the lean movement, or you take, Marty Kagan and the Silicon Valley product group and dual track agile, there's this whole world of thinking about that kind of concept, the idea of, look, I got to get to something that I can prove value as quickly as I can, but I'm going to do it not by going off and building the perfect answer. I'm going to assume that I've got some stuff right and some stuff wrong, and I'm never going to, I really love this. Everything is a hypothesis, right? Because if you're hypothesis driven, you're data driven. As a data geek, who doesn't love that, right?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of this, what you're saying about whether you have the right answer, the perfect answer, just, try to create the thing that you're wanting to create. It kind of reminds me of this phrase of business where you try to get it out there and then perfect it after the fact. And they refer to it as a ready, fire, aim.
Yeah.
I think it goes along the lines of what you're talking about, of making sure that you have the right pieces together and then push forward, rather than trying to get the perfect solution before you start, because you're probably never going to find that perfect solution.
Yeah, one of my favorite people is Marty Kagan. He's written Inspired, how to create products customers love. And Marty talks about kind of the old traditional waterfall way. I've got this perfect answer, and I'm going to go out and write a requirements document, and I pass it over to design, and then they're going to go build it piece by piece to a piece. And then I'm going to, go through a testing process, and then I'm going to deliver it. And that's God knows how long you just took doing that. And that's one iteration cycle. If you got it wrong, oh boy, that's a very expensive cycle, right? So if you can find a way to get to smaller increments and test them and iterate on them, then you can get there much better. There is a trick to that, though, that this is something I kind of struggle with. And frankly, I talk to my team about all the time. They're, totally bought into this idea. And so they want to get stuff out there, right? I want to get it out there. I want to see how users respond to it. Then I want to, kind of go back. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But if you put something out there that just doesn't work, then when you get it right, you may have lost some portion of your user base who thinks these guys are idiots. They put out stuff that doesn't work, right? So there's some kind of middle ground there. You've got to iterate, but you've got to, deliver some quality from the beginning. And if you do put stuff out there that just fundamentally has got problems in it, you better be prepared to iterate quickly, right? So if you're able to respond days or hours or weeks, kind of versus months or quarters, the market's going to be more forgiving to stuff that is not quite right. So there's a balance there that has to be struck. And I would always recommend people keep that in mind.
That's interesting. I have probably an odd question for you, but I'm curious, what do you have any lessons learned or recommendations or suggestions for someone who is already an entrepreneur because we've been talking about making startups. What about people who are already in that realm and they've already got a company that's been around for a couple of years, but they feel a little bit stagnant. They feel like they're not growing as fast as they feel like they should be. Do you have any suggestions about how they could maybe pivot in some way, or do you think that it's just keep pushing forward, or is there some other kind of tactic that someone in that situation could do?
I mean, that's a really, good question. A tricky one is when to pivot and when to stick it out, right? I'm not sure that there's a formula for that. There's a basic kind of thing, some of the things that you see in stagnation, right? It's maybe you have the basis of something that's an idea that's going to create value, but when you get to a point where you realize what we're working on, it just can't create the value that we want to create, right? So that's a signal that you should probably be thinking about pivoting, right? And then the other signal, the other place to look for a signal that you need to think about pivoting is that even if you have something that creates value, the cost and effort of getting it into customers' hands in a way that they'll pay for it is just too high for its value, right? That's a signal. And related to that signal would be a secondary one, which goes to how long are they going to need to keep using it, right? So if you sell something that's a one-off thing, like there's a software company that I was talking to recently who had some cool ideas, but their entire product was to help companies convert from platform A to platform B. And I thought, well, that's great. It's really cool. But what happens when they're done, right? They're going to throw your product out, right? So that's your value is, conversion from platform A to platform B. And even if you deliver that value, you have a really hard time capturing enough value for the cost of getting those customers, right? So the great thing about subscription software like what we have is if you do create value, people keep using it. They're going to use it over and over again. So we really super care about how much they use it and that they're getting value of it. So they keep using it, right? So, and right now we're sitting at a renewal rate of like 98%. So we feel pretty darn good about it, right? That allows you to flip how much that, kind of upfront cost is. But I would say that there's some mathematical formula about the cost of acquiring companies to amount of value you're creating, what you can price. And if you can't create a formula that works, that you should really think about. And the second is maybe the first one really was, if whatever idea you're after, you just can't find a way to create the value you're trying to create, then it's time to think about, kind of pivoting. So it's a tricky thing for companies. I mean, you could say Aginity pivoted twice before I acquired them, which I guess you kind of call that the third pivot. We're clearly not going to pivot because it's working, right? So thank goodness for that. The company G4 Analytics, which I founded back to the early days, and we pivoted. I think that happens, right?
That's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on the show and chatting with us today. I think there's a lot of good bits of wisdom in here for folks that want to start a project or start their own company. Before we wrap up, is there anywhere you'd like to send folks to get more of Rick Hall?
Sure. Yeah. So, aginity.com, that's our website. We're also, kind of heavily on LinkedIn. Go check us out. Like, our model is kind of free, trial, and expand, right? So download the product for free, trial it. If you like it, pay for it. If you don't, tell us why you didn't. If you can, we're always trying to learn from that. And if you're a business analyst trying to crunch big data, we hope you'll give us a shout. I'm also on LinkedIn, and, I've had a lot of good people help me over the years. I'm always interested in helping other entrepreneurs. So if I can be of any help, I tell people, hey, go find me on LinkedIn, reach out, and I'll either try to give you advice or connect you with somebody who can.
That's awesome. I appreciate you letting us pick your brain about it. As an entrepreneur myself, I'm very thankful that you came on the show so we could talk about it. And I'm very thankful that Eric asked me to be on it because he was like, hey, I know it's last minute. Like, we're going to talk about being an entrepreneur. Yeah, I'm in. For sure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, your feedback is welcome. Head on over to sudo.show/discuss. If you would like more of Brandon and I, you can find it over at sudo.show and on social media at Sudo Show Podcast.
If you want to check out some more awesome content from all the open sorcerers of the Destination Linux network, you can check it out by going to destinationlinux.network.
Brandon will be back with us in our next episode. You can catch him on Twitter at dbrandonjohnson or at his website, open-tech.net. And Michael, where should folks go to find you?
Well, they can go to destinationlinux.network and find all of the shows that I'm on. We got Twill, we got Destination Linux, Hardware Addicts, Twill as in This Week in Linux for those who don't know, but there's a lot of great content over there. I know I already sort of mentioned that, plugged it a little bit, but there's a lot of great stuff, and I happen to be on a few of them. So you can check those out, destinationlinux.network, and also you'll find YouTube channels there as well as many other things, and hopefully you'll enjoy all the great content that we got.
It's all right. I'll let you plug your stuff in the network again, just because you brought extra credit with you today. You wore your Sudo Show shirt.
That's right. I got to represent.
So yeah, if you want to get your own Sudo mug or shirts, just head on over to sudo.show/swag. And Michael's been doing a great job of adding more swag and different items for you to get to show off your Sudo love. And of course, you can follow me at ITGuyEric or on itguyeric.com. Remember, the Sudo Show is your place for all things enterprise open source. Until next time.
Wait, wasn't that that was my line? No, that was my line. Because
my show.
But, oh, right.